A little boy stood frozen on the sidewalk, his baseball forgotten at his feet. 30 yards ahead, blocking his path home, was the largest dog he'd ever seen. Black as midnight, with eyes that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun. "Go away!" 8-year-old Ethan Miller's voice cracked with fear. "Go away, you stupid dog!" His small hands balled into fists at his sides. Shoulders tensed as if preparing to run or fight, though he knew he could do neither. The massive animal tilted its head, studying the child with an unsettling intelligence. Then, defying all expectations, the dog did something that made Ethan's blood run cold. It didn't growl. It didn't charge. Instead, it lowered its enormous body to the ground, rolled onto its back, and whimpered a sound so achingly familiar that Ethan felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge. Montana was the kind of small town where everyone knew your business before you did. Nestled between rolling hills and the edge of Blackwater National Forest, its 3,000 residents lived in the comfortable embrace of community and tradition. It was here that the Miller family had put down roots 3 generations ago, in a 2-story colonial with white trim and a sprawling backyard that backed up to the forest line. Ethan Miller had once been known throughout Oak Ridge as the boy who was never without his dog. At 6 years old, he'd been gifted Scout, a Newfoundland puppy with paws too big for her body and a heart even bigger. Before the incident, you couldn't find one without the other, the small, tow-headed boy and his ever-growing shadow of black fur. They'd been inseparable, with Scout sleeping at the foot of Ethan's bed every night and waiting patiently by the school bus stop every afternoon. Sarah Miller, Ethan's mother, taught 3rd grade at Oak Ridge Elementary. A woman with kind eyes and practical hands, she'd been the one to suggest a dog might help their shy son make connections. Her husband Robert worked as a forest ranger, his deep knowledge of the wilderness making him both respected and essential to the community. Together, they'd created a warm home for their only child, and later, for the dog that became part of their family. Dr. Thompson had been Oak Ridge's only veterinarian for 15 years. His clinic on Main Street treated everything from farm animals to beloved pets, his gentle manner earning him universal trust. He'd been the one to give Scout her vaccinations, to treat her when she'd eaten something questionable from the Miller's garden, to assure the family that their dog was special, "One of the smartest I've ever treated," he'd said with that trustworthy smile. Sheriff Jackson had known Robert since high school. His office was more often occupied with tourists getting lost in the forest than any real crime. His weathered face had been among the first to join the search when Scout disappeared, and among the last to give up. And then there was Mrs. Henderson, the Miller's neighbor for 20 years. At 78, her eyes might be failing, but nothing escaped her attention. From her porch rocking chair, she watched the comings and goings of Oak Ridge with the sharp attention of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize trouble brewing before it boiled over. None of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine around the disappearance and reappearance of a dog. The day Scout disappeared had begun like any perfect summer morning, the kind that small-town Montana specializes in crisp air softening under a climbing sun, wildflowers nodding in gentle breezes, and the distant mountains standing sentinel against an impossibly blue sky. It was the first weekend of August, 2 years ago, when Robert suggested they take advantage of his day off with a family hike in the eastern trails of Blackwater Forest. "Scout needs the exercise," he'd said over breakfast, watching the dog's ears perk up at her name. "And so does our boy." He ruffled Ethan's hair as the 6-year-old shoveled cereal into his mouth, already excited by the prospect of adventure. Sarah packed sandwiches and trail mix while Robert filled water bottles and checked his trail map. Ethan, with all the solemnity a first grader could muster, was put in charge of Scout's leash, a responsibility he took as seriously as a presidential oath. "She listens to you better than anyone," Sarah had told him, not knowing those words would haunt her son for years to come. The trail they chose wound through pine forests and meadows, well-maintained but not heavily trafficked. Robert pointed out animal tracks. Sarah identified wildflowers. And Ethan marched proudly, with Scout padding faithfully beside him. The massive Newfoundland, already over 90 pounds at 2 years old, could have easily pulled the small boy off his feet. But she matched her pace to his with the gentle patience that characterized her breed. 3 miles in, they stopped in a sun-dappled clearing for lunch. Scout lay at Ethan's feet, occasionally accepting offered bites of sandwich crust. It was, Sarah would later recall, the last perfect moment before everything changed. The sound came without warning, a tremendous crack like thunder, echoing through the trees. Later, they would learn it was a controlled detonation from a Forest Service crew clearing a rock slide on the far side of the mountain. But in that moment, it was unexpected and terrifying, especially to Scout. The dog bolted upright, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Before anyone could react, she lunged forward with a strength born of pure animal panic. "I tried to hold on." "Dad," Ethan would sob later that night, his small hands raw from rope burn. "I tried so hard." But no 6-year-old could have restrained a 100-pound dog in full flight. The leash tore through Ethan's grip, leaving angry red welts across his palms, and Scout disappeared into the underbrush with the blue leash trailing behind her like a surrender flag. The next 4 hours dissolved into increasingly desperate searching. Robert's calls echoed through the forest. Sarah comforted Ethan while trying to contain her own rising panic. They split up and reconnected, pushed further into the woods than was wise, and finally called Sheriff Jackson as the afternoon light began to fade. By nightfall, a search party of 12 locals combed the woods with flashlights, calling Scout's name until their voices grew hoarse. Robert carried an exhausted, tear-streaked Ethan on his shoulders as they finally admitted defeat for the day. "We'll come back at first light," Sheriff Jackson promised, his hand heavy on Robert's shoulder. "Dogs get spooked, but they come back. She knows this forest almost as well as you do." But Scout didn't come back the next day, or the day after. The search expanded, then contracted, then finally dwindled to just the Millers. Sarah posted flyers throughout Oak Ridge and neighboring towns. Robert spent every off-duty hour combing the forest. Ethan sat on the back porch each evening, calling Scout's name in a voice that grew quieter as weeks passed. "Dr." Thompson stopped by regularly, offering both professional advice and personal comfort. "Newfoundlands are survivors," he assured them. "She's got the coat for Montana winters, and the instinct to hunt if necessary." By the 3-month mark, Sarah began to gently suggest they consider the possibility that Scout wasn't coming home. Robert resisted longest, but eventually even he stopped carrying Scout's favorite tennis ball in his pocket. Only Ethan maintained a child's stubborn hope, leaving his bedroom window cracked open each night so Scout can smell her way home. But that hope took its toll. The once carefree boy grew cautious, especially around other dogs. When Mrs. Henderson's corgi barked at him from behind her fence, Ethan crossed to the other side of the street. He declined a birthday party invitation because the family had a German shepherd. By the time 7 months had passed, Ethan Miller, once known throughout town as the boy who was never without his dog, had developed a full-fledged fear of the animals he once loved. "It's my fault," he confided to his mother one night, his small face solemn in the glow of his nightlight. "I wasn't strong enough to keep her safe." No amount of reassurance from his parents could convince him otherwise. The rope burns on his hands had long since healed, but the marks on his heart remained raw and open. The first strange occurrences began 3 weeks before Ethan's fateful encounter on the sidewalk. Sarah noticed them, first small things easily dismissed, until their accumulation became impossible to ignore. The screen on Ethan's bedroom window, the one he'd insisted remained cracked open for months after Scout disappeared, was bent outward, as if something had pushed against it from inside. Muddy paw prints, too large for any neighborhood cat, appeared on the back porch on mornings after rainfall. Once, Robert found tufts of black fur caught in the lowest branches of the pine tree that overlooked their backyard. "Probably just a bear cub," he told Sarah, though his furrowed brow betrayed his uncertainty. Bears weren't uncommon in the area, but they rarely ventured this close to town, and never with such persistent interest in one particular house. Mrs. Henderson noticed, too. From her porch across the street, her keen eyes tracked shadows that moved too deliberately to be wind-blown branches. "Something's circling your place," she told Sarah one morning as they both collected their mail. "Something big." Sarah might have dismissed the observation as the imagination of a lonely widow, but she'd heard the scratching herself, faint but unmistakable, against the side of the house in the deepest hours of night. Twice she'd roused Robert, but by the time he grabbed a flashlight and checked outside, whatever had made the sound was gone. They decided not to mention these occurrences to Ethan. The boy had only recently stopped having nightmares about Scout, had finally agreed to donate her untouched food bowls to the animal shelter. Why rekindle his anxiety over what was probably just local wildlife? But Ethan had his own encounters. One Tuesday afternoon, he could have sworn he heard the distinctive jingling of Scout's collar tags while walking home from the bus stop. He whirled around, heart pounding, but the sidewalk behind him was empty. Another time, playing alone in the backyard, he felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as his eyes scanned the tree line, finding nothing but still feeling the weight of an unseen gaze. Then came the baseball incident. It was a Saturday in late October, the air carrying the first bite of approaching winter. Robert was working a weekend shift, and Sarah had driven into the neighboring town for groceries. Ethan, bored and restless, took his baseball and glove into the front yard, tossing the ball against the side of the house in clear violation of his mother's rules. One throw went wild, sending the ball bouncing across the front lawn and into the street. It rolled downhill, gathering speed, and Ethan chased after it with the single-minded determination of a child who knew he'd be in trouble if he lost his favorite ball. He was so focused on the rolling baseball that he didn't notice the large animal at the bottom of the hill until he was barely 30 yards away. When he finally looked up and saw the massive black dog blocking his path, Ethan felt his entire body go cold, then hot, then cold again. It was enormous, easily as big as Scout had been, maybe bigger. Black fur, thick and slightly matted in places, broad chest and powerful shoulders. And those eyes, amber brown and unsettlingly intelligent, fixed directly on him with an intensity that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. Fear, immediate and overwhelming, surged through him. Every scary story about wild dogs, every warning about rabies and wolf hybrids that flourished in playground conversations, every lingering nightmare about losing Scout, all of it crystallized into a single moment of pure terror. "Go away," he shouted, his voice high and thin with panic. "Go away, you stupid dog." He expected the animal to charge, to growl, to bare its teeth, any of the threatening behaviors his imagination had conjured during 2 years of developing fear. What he didn't expect was what actually happened. The dog tilted its head, almost quizzically, as if confused by Ethan's hostility. Then, with deliberate slowness, it lowered its massive body to the ground. And then, most shocking of all, it rolled onto its back, exposing its belly in the universal canine gesture of submission, and made a soft, whimpering sound. A sound Ethan knew. A sound that had accompanied countless mornings when Scout would flop onto her back beside his bed, begging for a belly rub before breakfast. The similarity was so striking that for one wild moment, Ethan thought it was Scout. But that was impossible. Scout had been gone for 2 years. If she were alive, she would have come home. Wouldn't she? Frozen in place. Ethan stared at the dog. The dog stared back, still on its back, still making that achingly familiar whimpering sound. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Mrs. Henderson hadn't chosen that moment to step out onto her front porch. "Ethan Miller, what on earth are you doing in the middle of the street? And good Lord, is that a wolf?" Her voice broke the spell. The dog immediately rolled back onto its feet, but instead of running away, it took a single step toward Ethan. The boy stumbled backward, nearly falling in his haste to retreat. "Don't move, child," Mrs. Henderson called, already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling your father and the sheriff." At the mention of calling someone, the dog's ears perked up. It gave Ethan one last long look almost, he would later think, a look of regret before turning and trotting away, disappearing around the corner with surprising speed for such a large animal. By the time Sheriff Jackson arrived 15 minutes later, there was no sign of the dog, but Mrs. Henderson was certain of what she'd seen. "Biggest dog I've ever laid eyes on," she told the sheriff. "Or wolf, or whatever it was, standing right there, staring at the boy like it knew him." Ethan, still shaken, could only nod in agreement. He didn't mention the whimpering sound, or the way the dog had submitted to him, or the disturbing familiarity of its eyes. Some things were too confusing, too impossible to put into words that adults would understand. That night, for the first time in over a year, Ethan dreamed of Scout. And for the first time since her disappearance, it wasn't a nightmare. The Millers' dining room had become an impromptu incident command center by Sunday evening. Robert, still in his Forest Service uniform, spread maps across the table while Sheriff Jackson made notes in his worn leather notebook. Sarah moved between them, refilling coffee cups and occasionally glancing toward the living room where Ethan sat watching television, the volume turned unnaturally high. "I've had 3 other reports this month," Sheriff Jackson said, keeping his voice low, "all describing a large black dog on the outskirts of town. The Petersons said it was digging through their trash 2 weeks ago. Jim at the hardware store spotted it near the elementary school playground after hours." "Could be a feral dog," Robert suggested, though the tightness in his voice betrayed his unspoken thought. "Or someone's pet got loose." "That's what I figured too," the sheriff agreed, "until Mrs. Henderson mentioned its behavior with Ethan. Rolling over, whimpering. That's not feral dog behavior. That's a domesticated animal." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "You don't think it couldn't possibly be?" "Scout's been gone 2 years," Robert said firmly, as if trying to convince himself as much as his wife. "Even if she survived in the forest, which is already unlikely, she wouldn't have stayed away this long." "Not Scout." The sheriff nodded in agreement. "But it could be a similar breed. Newfoundlands aren't common around here, but they're not unheard of either." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. Sarah hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Dr. Thompson, who carried his veterinary bag as if making a house call. "Jackson called me," he explained, nodding toward the sheriff. "Thought I might be able to offer some insight about this mystery dog." The veterinarian settled into a chair, accepting a mug of coffee from Sarah with a grateful smile. His presence had always been reassuring to the Millers, especially during Scout's early years. Now, as they described the recent sightings and Ethan's encounter, Dr. Thompson listened with the attentive focus that had made him so trusted in Oak Ridge. "If it is a stray or abandoned Newfoundland, it's in potential danger," he finally said. "We've had unseasonably cold temperatures predicted for next week. Plus, I've been hearing about coyote packs moving closer to town, probably because of the drought affecting their usual prey. Not to mention some folks around here shoot first and ask questions later when it comes to large animals near their property," Sheriff Jackson added. Sarah glanced again toward the living room, lowering her voice even further. "We haven't told Ethan, but we're concerned about his reaction if he sees this dog again. He's just started to overcome his fear of dogs. Another frightening encounter could set him back." Dr. Thompson's expression grew thoughtful. "Or," he suggested carefully, "supervised interaction with this dog, assuming we can safely locate and evaluate it, might actually help him. Exposure therapy is often the most effective treatment for specific phobias." The conversation continued in this vein for another hour, ultimately resulting in a plan. Sheriff Jackson would alert his deputies to report any sightings of the dog, but approach with caution rather than aggression. Dr. Thompson volunteered to evaluate the animal if it was found. Robert would check with the Forest Service records for any recent reports of unusual wildlife activity in the area surrounding Oak Ridge. None of them noticed Ethan standing in the hallway shadow, having turned down his television specifically to eavesdrop. The adult's hushed tones and serious expressions had only confirmed what the 8-year-old already suspected: something unusual was happening, and it centered around the dog he'd encountered. That night, for the first time since Scout disappeared, Ethan deliberately left his bedroom window open wider than the usual crack. The dog returned 3 days later. On a Wednesday evening, just as dusk settled over Oak Ridge, Robert was working a late shift, and Sarah was grading papers at the kitchen table when she heard Ethan's startled cry from the backyard. She found her son standing frozen beside his abandoned basketball, staring at the tree line. There, half concealed by shadows and underbrush, stood the massive black dog. "Don't move," Sarah whispered, instinctively putting her arm in front of Ethan, though she was several steps behind him. "I'm going to call Sheriff Jackson." "No," Ethan said, surprising her. "It's okay, Mom. It won't hurt us." The certainty in his voice gave Sarah pause. She watched as the dog took a hesitant step forward, then another, its movements deliberate and non-threatening. In the fading light, she could see what had so startled Mrs. Henderson. The animal was enormous, easily matching Scout's size, with the same broad chest and powerful shoulders characteristic of Newfoundlands. "Look how skinny it is," Ethan whispered. "I think it's hungry." Before Sarah could protest, Ethan had darted back into the house. He returned moments later, clutching half a bologna sandwich, his uneaten lunch from earlier that day. With his mother watching in astonishment, Ethan slowly approached the edge of the yard, placed the sandwich on the ground, and backed away. The dog watched this process with that same unsettling intelligence Mrs. Henderson had described. Once Ethan had retreated to his mother's side, the animal approached the offering, sniffed it cautiously, then consumed it in 2 quick bites. "Can we keep it?" Ethan asked, turning to Sarah with the first genuine excitement she'd seen in him for months. The question was so unexpected, both because of Ethan's long-standing fear of dogs and its echoing of a similar question he'd asked when first meeting Scout, that Sarah found herself momentarily speechless. "Honey, we don't know anything about this dog," she finally managed. "It could be dangerous or sick or belong to someone else." "But it's not," Ethan insisted with a child's certainty. "It's special. I can tell." The dog, having finished the sandwich, sat down at the edge of the yard and watched them with what Sarah could have sworn was hopeful anticipation. "Tell you what," she compromised. "We'll call Dr. Thompson and see what he thinks. If the dog is still here when he arrives, we'll let him check it out." "Okay." Ethan agreed to this plan, though he insisted on remaining in the yard to make sure it doesn't leave. Sarah called the veterinarian, who promised to come right over, then phoned Robert to update him on the situation. By the time Dr. Thompson's truck pulled into their driveway 20 minutes later, an extraordinary scene had developed in the backyard. Ethan sat cross-legged on the grass, still maintaining a cautious distance of about 15 feet, while the dog lay with its head on its paws, watching the boy with unwavering attention. "Well now," Dr. Thompson said softly, as he joined Sarah on the back porch. "Isn't this something?" He observed the tableau for several minutes before slowly approaching, his veterinary bag in hand. The dog's eyes shifted to him, alert but not aggressive. "Hello there, big fellow," Dr. Thompson said in the gentle tone he reserved for anxious animals. "Mind if I take a look at you?" To everyone's surprise, the dog not only allowed the examination but seemed to welcome it, standing still as Dr. Thompson checked its eyes, ears, and mouth, ran professional hands along its body, and even examined its paws. No collar or tags, he announced. No microchip that I can feel. Male. Probably around 2 years old based on his teeth. Definitely a Newfoundland, possibly mixed with something else. He's undernourished, but not critically so. No obvious injuries or illnesses that I can detect without proper equipment. So he's a stray? Sarah asked. Dr. Thompson straightened up, his expression thoughtful. Most likely, though he's remarkably well socialized for a stray, comfortable with humans, responsive to voice cues. I'd guess he was someone's pet not too long ago. Can we keep him? Ethan asked again, his voice more insistent. Dr. Thompson smiled down at the boy. Well, that's really up to your parents. Ethan, but I think we should first make sure no one's looking for him. Sheriff Jackson can check for missing dog reports, and we should probably put up some flyers. But in the meantime, he continued, glancing at Sarah, he does need shelter, especially with the cold front moving in. If you're willing, I'd say let him stay in your garage tonight. I can bring over some food and basic supplies. Sarah hesitated, looking between her son's hopeful face and the dog's steady gaze. I should talk to Robert first. Dad will say yes, Ethan declared with confidence. I know he will. And remarkably. When Robert arrived home an hour later to find the dog comfortably settled on an old blanket in their garage, fed with kibble that Dr. Thompson had provided and already dubbed Ranger by Ethan, he did agree, albeit with conditions. 2 weeks, he stipulated, crouching to observe the dog at eye level. We'll look for his owners for 2 weeks. If no one claims him by then, we'll discuss permanent arrangements. That night, the Miller household felt different, energized in a way it hadn't been for 2 years. Ethan went to bed without complaint, and Sarah overheard him whispering to himself as she passed his bedroom door, Scout sent him to us. I know she did. The 2-week trial period revealed several curious things about Ranger. First, despite his initial appearance of being a stray, he displayed impeccable house manners once allowed inside never-chewing furniture, always waiting by the door to go out, and even seeming to understand which rooms were off-limits without being explicitly taught. Second, he formed an immediate and intense bond with Ethan. By the 4th day, Ranger was following the boy everywhere he was permitted, sleeping outside his bedroom door, and waiting patiently by the front window during school hours. Third, and most perplexing, were his periodic attempts to lead family members toward the forest. It began with Ranger standing at the back fence, looking intently toward the tree line, then back at whoever was in the yard with him. When this failed to communicate his apparent desire, he progressed to gentle tugging on sleeves or pant legs, always followed by that same meaningful look toward the forest. He wants to show us something, Ethan insisted after a particularly determined attempt to lead Robert toward the trees one Saturday morning. Or he's just remembering being in the wild, Robert suggested. Maybe he lived in the forest before finding us. But the behavior persisted, becoming more urgent as the 2-week deadline approached. Ranger remained gentle and obedient in all other respects, but his forest fixation was unwavering. Meanwhile, Dr. Thompson had taken a curious interest in the dog. He stopped by the Miller's house no less than 5 times during those 2 weeks, ostensibly to check on Ranger's health and adjustment. During each visit, he asked increasingly detailed questions about the dog's behavior, intelligence, and physical capabilities. I've been consulting with a colleague at the university's veterinary program. he explained when Sarah commented on his thoroughness. Ranger exhibits some unusual characteristics for a mixed-breed stray. We're simply documenting them for research purposes. Sarah might have questioned this explanation more thoroughly if she hadn't been distracted by another development, Ethan's remarkable transformation. The formerly cautious, often withdrawn boy had become animated and engaged. He spent hours in the backyard with Ranger, teaching him tricks, tossing tennis balls, and even resuming his once-abandoned baseball practice with the dog as an enthusiastic audience. Most significantly, his fear of other dogs seemed to have vanished. When they encountered Mrs. Peterson walking her corgi during an evening stroll, Ethan not only didn't cross the street, but actually asked if he could pet the smaller dog. "It's like having the old Ethan back," Sarah confided to Robert as they watched their son and Ranger through the kitchen window. "I haven't seen him this happy since Scout," Robert finished for her. "I know." By the time the 2-week deadline arrived, no owner had come forward to claim Ranger despite the flyers posted throughout Oak Ridge and neighboring towns. The Millers gathered around their dining room table for a family meeting to decide the dog's fate, though the outcome was never really in doubt. All in favor of Ranger becoming a permanent member of the Miller family. "Raise your hand," Robert announced formally. 3 human hands shot up, followed to everyone's delight by Ranger's paw, which he placed solemnly on the table. "It's unanimous," Robert laughed. The first genuine laugh Sarah had heard from him in too long. "Welcome to the family, Ranger." None of them noticed Dr. Thompson driving slowly past their house that evening, his cell phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end of the line. Nor did they see Mrs. Henderson watching from her porch. Her rheumy eyes narrowed with suspicion as the veterinarian's truck continued down the street and turned toward the forest road. The November moon hung like a silver dollar in the black Montana sky, casting sharp shadows across the Millers' backyard. It had been 3 weeks since Ranger officially joined their family, and the household had settled into comfortable new routines. Ethan had taken to his responsibilities as Ranger's primary caretaker with surprising diligence, feeding, brushing, and exercising the massive dog with the seriousness of purpose that only an 8-year-old given an important job can muster. Sarah had just finished tucking Ethan into bed. Ranger dutifully stretched across the foot of the mattress, a privilege granted after much negotiation and Robert's installation of a sturdier bed frame. She paused in the doorway, taking in the peaceful scene, her son's tousled blonde hair spread across the pillow, one small hand resting on Ranger's back, both of them already drifting toward sleep. The sight brought an unexpected lump to her throat. For the first time in 2 years, their home felt whole again. "I think we need to consider the possibility," she said to Robert later as they sat on the living room couch. Voices lowered. "That Ranger might be related to Scout somehow." Robert looked up from his forestry reports, his expression guarded. "Sarah, I know how it sounds," she pressed on, "but think about it. Robert, the same breed, the same unusual intelligence, the way he bonded with Ethan immediately. And those eyes you've noticed his eyes." "Lots of dogs have brown eyes," Robert countered, though without conviction. "Not like these. Not with that particular expression." Sarah leaned forward. "And the timing, 2 years is enough for a puppy to grow to adulthood." Robert set his papers aside, rubbing his face with both hands. "You're suggesting that Scout wasn't just pregnant when she disappeared, but that she gave birth in the wild, and one of her puppies found his way back to us. That's incredible." "Yes, but not impossible." Sarah reached for his hand. "You're the one who always told me that Newfoundlands have extraordinary instincts, that they're natural swimmers and rescuers, that they have an almost supernatural bond with their people." "I said remarkable, not supernatural," Robert corrected, but a thoughtful crease had formed between his eyebrows. "Even if, and it's a massive if, Ranger is somehow Scout's offspring, that still doesn't explain where she's been all this time, or why she never came home." Their discussion was interrupted by a soft whine from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of Ranger's claws clicking rapidly across the hardwood floor of Ethan's bedroom. Then came their son's voice, still thick with sleep. "Ranger! What's wrong, boy?" Sarah and Robert exchanged a quick glance before hurrying upstairs. They found Ethan sitting up in bed, watching with confusion as Ranger paced agitatedly by the window, his massive head swinging between the glass and the bedroom door. "He just started acting weird," Ethan explained, rubbing his eyes. "Like he hears something." Robert approached the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. "I don't see anything. Could be a raccoon or—" His words died as Ranger suddenly barked a deep, urgent sound that none of them had heard from him before. The dog spun in a tight circle, then lunged toward the bedroom door with such determination that he nearly knocked Robert aside. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, instinctively moving closer to Ethan's bed. Ranger barked again, pawing insistently at the door. When Robert opened it, the dog bolted down the hallway and thundered down the stairs, his nails skittering on the wooden steps. By the time the family reached the main floor, Ranger was at the back door, scratching frantically at the wood. "Should we let him out?" Ethan asked, now fully awake and wide-eyed. Robert hesitated, then reached for the flashlight they kept on the entryway table. "I'll check outside first. You two stay here." But as soon as he cracked the door open, Ranger forced his way through the gap and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Robert calling after him in vain. "Ranger!" Ethan cried, pushing past his father before either parent could stop him. "Come back!" What followed was a chaotic blur, Robert sprinting after Ethan, Sarah pausing only long enough to grab her cell phone before following, all of them calling Ranger's name as they pursued the rapidly disappearing shape of the dog across their backyard and toward the forest edge. "Ethan, stop!" Robert shouted, but their son was already pushing through the underbrush where Ranger had vanished, moving with the heedless determination of a child focused on a single goal. The moonlight barely penetrated the forest canopy, leaving them to navigate by the bouncing beam of Robert's flashlight and the occasional glimpse of Ranger's tail disappearing around a bend in the crude trail. The dog seemed to know exactly where he was going, following a path invisible to human eyes but clearly marked in whatever sensory map guided canine navigation. 10 minutes into the forest, with Sarah's lungs burning from the combination of cold air and exertion, they lost sight of both Ranger and Ethan. "Ethan!" she screamed, panic overwhelming her exhaustion. "Over here!" came his voice from somewhere to their left, sounding strange, tight with a mixture of fear and something else. "Mom! Dad! Hurry!" They crashed through the underbrush toward his voice, branches clawing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip them with every step. Robert's flashlight beam finally caught Ethan standing in a small clearing, Ranger at his side, but the dog wasn't alone. 3 men stood on the opposite side of the clearing, One held a high-powered flashlight that momentarily blinded the Millers. Another gripped what looked disturbingly like a tranquilizer gun, and the third, stepping forward into the converging light beams, was Dr. Thompson. "Robert. Sarah," the veterinarian said, his voice unnaturally calm. "You shouldn't be out here this time of night. It's dangerous." "What are you doing here?" Robert demanded, instinctively moving to place himself between the men and his family. "Professional business," Dr. Thompson replied smoothly. "We've been tracking an unusual pack formation in this area. Nothing for you to worry about." "With tranquilizer guns?" Sarah challenged, her arm around Ethan's shoulders, trying to pull him back toward the trail. Ranger, however, refused to budge from his protective stance in front of the boy. "Standard wildlife management procedure," one of the other men offered, though he lowered the gun slightly under Robert's glare. "You're lying," Ethan said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the tense standoff. "You want to take Ranger away. I heard you on the phone at our house. You said he was perfect for the program." "Whatever that means." Dr. Thompson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Children often misunderstand adult conversations. Ethan, I was simply discussing Ranger's remarkable recovery and adaptation with a colleague." "Then why are you in the forest at night?" Robert pressed, his forestry training making him acutely aware of how unusual and suspicious such activity was. "Any legitimate wildlife research would be conducted through proper channels. I would know about it. Not everything goes through your department." "Miller," the third man said, his tone dismissive. "Some operations are classified." "By whom?" Sarah demanded. "You don't work for the government? You're a small-town vet." Dr. Thompson sighed, a sound of genuine regret. "I had hoped to handle this more discreetly. The dog you call Ranger is quite valuable. Mrs. Miller, part of a specialized breeding program that produces animals with exceptional intelligence and physical capabilities. He escaped during transport about a month ago." "You're lying," Ethan repeated, more forcefully. "Ranger found us because—" Sarah squeezed his shoulder in warning, suddenly very certain they shouldn't reveal their suspicions about Ranger's connection to Scout. "Regardless of what you believe," Dr. Thompson continued, "the dog is legally the property of my research collective. I've been patient, allowing him to stay with you temporarily while arrangements were made. But now it's time for him to fulfill his purpose." As he spoke, the man with the tranquilizer gun raised it again, aiming carefully at Ranger. "No!" Ethan shouted, throwing himself against Ranger's side. What happened next occurred with such speed that later none of the Millers could agree on the exact sequence of events. Ranger barked a deep, commanding sound that echoed through the trees almost immediately. Answering barks came from the darkness surrounding the clearing. The man with the gun swung it wildly, trying to locate the source of the sounds, while Dr. Thompson's confident expression dissolved into alarm. "It's a trap," he hissed to his companions. "They've circled us." "What are you talking about?" the gunman demanded. "There's nothing out there except—" His words cut off as a large black shape burst from the underbrush directly behind him, knocking him forward and sending the tranquilizer gun flying from his hands. Another dark form launched itself at the man holding the flashlight, while a third circled around to stand beside Ranger, hackles raised, teeth bared in unmistakable threat. "My God," Sarah whispered, clutching Ethan closer. "They're all Newfoundlands." In the chaotic light of the dropped flashlights, they could make out at least 5 large dogs, all similar to Ranger, all focused with laser intensity on Dr. Thompson and his associates. The men backed together. Their earlier confidence evaporated. "Call them off." "Miller," Dr. Thompson said, his voice strained, "before someone gets hurt." "They're not mine to call off," Robert answered honestly. "I don't know where they came from." As if in response to his words, a new sound cut through the night, a piercing whistle that made all the dogs' ears prick up simultaneously. The Newfoundlands didn't attack, but neither did they retreat, maintaining their circle around the increasingly nervous men. "I'm calling Sheriff Jackson," Sarah said, raising her phone. "That would be unwise," Dr. Thompson warned. "Our operation has certain protections. Legal complications would not benefit anyone, especially your family." "Is that a threat?" Robert stepped forward, fists clenched. "A reality check," the veterinarian replied. "These dogs are valuable breeding stock. Each one is worth more than you make in a year. Miller, the people I represent don't take kindly to interference." "And who exactly are these people?" Sarah demanded, already dialing. "Dr." Thompson smiled thinly. "Let's just say they provide specialized animals for clients with very specific needs and very deep pockets. Nothing illegal, just discreet." "You're stealing people's pets," Ethan accused, his voice trembling with righteous anger. "You're a dog thief." The vet's smile vanished. "I'm a businessman, boy, one who's rapidly losing patience. Now," whatever ultimatum he planned to deliver was cut short by the distinctive wail of police sirens, distant but approaching. Someone had already called for help. "Doctor?" Thompson's face twisted with frustration as he glanced toward the trail that would lead back to town. "We should go," one of his associates urged. "Now." "This isn't over," Dr. Thompson said, locking eyes with Robert. "Not by a long shot." The 3 men backed away, then turned and crashed through the underbrush in the opposite direction from the approaching sirens. As soon as they disappeared, the Newfoundlands relaxed their threatening postures. One by one, they melted back into the darkness, until only Ranger remained, pressing himself against Ethan's side as the boy buried his face in the dog's thick fur. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside her son, her hands checking him for injuries even as she knew he was physically unharmed. Ethan nodded against Ranger's neck. "They wanted to take him away," he mumbled, "but the others wouldn't let them." "The others," Robert repeated, sweeping his flashlight across the now empty clearing. "Where did they come from, and who called the police?" As if in answer to his question, a figure emerged from the trees behind them, the stooped but determined form of Mrs. Henderson, clutching a cell phone in one gnarled hand and an ancient but serviceable hunting rifle in the other. "I followed that snake Thompson," she announced without preamble. "Been suspicious of him for years. Always taking people's animals for special treatments that cost a fortune. Some never coming back quite right." She squinted at the Millers in the flashlight's glow. "You folks all right?" "Thanks to you," Sarah said, both confused and relieved by the elderly woman's timely intervention. "But how did you know to follow him tonight specifically?" Mrs. Henderson snorted. "Been watching him circle your place like a vulture ever since that dog showed up. Tonight he had those other 2 with him strangers. Not local, so I figured whatever he was planning was happening soon. She patted the rifle. Didn't plan to use this, mind you. Just brought it along as a persuader if needed. The wail of sirens grew louder, and flashlight beams began to dance between the trees as Sheriff Jackson and his deputies approached. Ranger, who had remained protectively at Ethan's side, suddenly lifted his head and gave a short, sharp bark toward a dense thicket of pines to their right, and from those shadows emerged one more Newfoundland, older than the others, with gray frosting its muzzle and a pronounced limp in its gait. It moved slowly but deliberately into the clearing, ignoring the startled exclamations of the humans, its attention fixed solely on Ranger and Ethan. "Oh my God!" Sarah breathed, recognition hitting her like a physical blow. "Robert, look at the marking on her chest. The white patch shaped like a star." Robert's flashlight beam confirmed what her heart already knew. Scout. Sheriff Jackson's deputies spread through the forest clearing, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The commotion seemed distant to the Millers, who stood frozen in a tableau of disbelief as the older Newfoundland scout, it had to be Scout, approached with that distinctive limping gait. "Stay back," Sheriff Jackson warned, one hand hovering near his holster as he eyed the dogs warily. We don't know if these animals are dangerous, but Ethan had already broken free from his mother's protective embrace, stumbling forward with a cry that seemed torn from the deepest part of his 8-year-old heart. "Scout!" The older dog's pace quickened at the sound of her name, her limp more pronounced with each hurried step. When she reached Ethan, she didn't jump up as she might have done 2 years earlier age, and whatever hardship she'd endured had clearly taken their toll, but pressed her graying muzzle against the boy's chest with a whimper of unmistakable recognition. "It's really her," Sarah whispered, tears streaming unchecked down her face as she knelt beside them. Her trembling fingers found the distinctive star-shaped white patch on Scout's chest, the marking that had been unique to their dog, the confirmation that this impossible reunion was actually happening. Robert joined them, his ranger training momentarily forgotten as he ran his hands over Scout's head and back, cataloging the changes 2 years had wrought. She was thinner than he remembered, her once glossy coat now matted in places and showing signs of hard living. The gray around her muzzle had spread to her eyes and ears, aging her well beyond her actual years. Most concerning was the pronounced limp and the way she held her right front leg slightly raised, suggesting an old injury that had never properly healed. "She's hurt," Ethan said, noticing his father's concerned examination. "Dad, she needs a doctor." Sheriff Jackson stepped closer, his initial wariness giving way to amazement. "Is that really your dog?" "The one that went missing 2 years back." "It's her," Robert confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I'd stake my career on it." Mrs. Henderson huffed from where she stood leaning on her rifle. "Well, I'll be damned. Pardon my French. That explains a few things." The sheriff glanced between Scout and Ranger, who remained protectively close to Ethan. "And the younger one? The one you've been keeping?" "Her son," Sarah said with sudden certainty. "Ranger is Scout's son. She must have been pregnant when she disappeared." One of the deputies, a younger man who had joined the department after Scout's disappearance, looked skeptical. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's quite a story. Dogs don't just survive in the wild for years and then show up with their offspring." "And yet here they are," Mrs. Henderson retorted sharply. "Perhaps instead of questioning what's right in front of your eyes, young man, You might focus on finding those men who were just threatening this family." Sheriff Jackson nodded in agreement. "Jenkins, take Williams and see if you can track those individuals Mrs. Henderson described. They couldn't have gotten far, not in these woods at night." He turned back to the Millers. "We'll need full statements from all of you, but that can wait until morning. Right now, let's get everyone back home safely." The walk back through the forest was slow and surreal. Scout struggled with the uneven terrain, her limp worsening with fatigue, until Robert gently lifted her into his arms despite her considerable weight. Ranger paced anxiously alongside them, occasionally darting ahead as if to scout the path, then returning to check on their progress. "The other dogs?" Ethan asked as they neared the edge of the forest. "Where did they go?" No one had an answer. The additional Newfoundlands that had appeared so dramatically in the clearing had vanished just as mysteriously once the threat had passed. Only Scout and Ranger remained. Back at the house, Robert carefully laid Scout on the living room rug while Sarah called the emergency veterinary clinic in the neighboring town. Ethan sat cross-legged beside his long-lost dog, gently stroking her graying head while Ranger settled protectively on her other side. "They can see her right away," Sarah reported after hanging up. "But it's a 30-minute drive." "I'll take her," Robert said, already gathering his keys. "You stay here with Ethan." "No," Ethan protested immediately. "I'm coming too. I'm not leaving her again." The look in his son's eyes, a mixture of determination and lingering fear, made Robert relent. "All right, we'll all go." Sheriff Jackson, who had followed them back to the house while his deputies continued the search, nodded his understanding. "I'll secure your property and wait here for my men to report back. Mrs. Henderson has agreed to give me her statement tonight so we can get a head start on identifying these individuals." The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic passed in tense silence. Scout lay across the back seat with her head in Ethan's lap. Her breathing labored, her eyes drifting closed, then snapping open as if fighting exhaustion. They had reluctantly left Ranger at home, secured in the garage after he'd nearly torn through the screen door in his determination to accompany them. At the clinic, a team of veterinarians immediately took Scout for examination. The waiting room's hard plastic chairs became the Miller family's world for the next 2 hours as they sat huddled together, jumping at every sound from the treatment area, exchanging theories about what might have happened to Scout over the past 2 years. "She must have given birth in the wild," Sarah speculated. "Ranger and those other dogs, they must be her puppies." "But how did they survive?" Robert wondered. A domesticated dog, pregnant, suddenly on her own in the Montana wilderness. "Scout was special," Ethan said with absolute conviction. "You always said she was the smartest dog you'd ever seen, Dad." Robert couldn't argue with that. Scout had always demonstrated intelligence well beyond typical canine capacity, recognizing dozens of words, solving problems, showing an almost uncanny awareness of the family's emotions and needs. If any dog could survive such a dramatic change in circumstances, it would be Scout. When the veterinarian finally emerged from the treatment area, her expression was grave. The Millers rose as one, bracing for the worst. "Scout is stable," the doctor began, offering this reassurance first. "But she has multiple health issues that need addressing. The most serious is her right front leg. It appears to have been broken at some point and healed improperly. There's significant arthritis in the joint now. She's also malnourished, has several infected wounds that we're treating with antibiotics, and shows signs of heartworm disease." "But she'll recover?" Sarah asked, clutching Robert's hand. The veterinarian hesitated. "Her age and the extent of her injuries make her prognosis guarded. The heartworm treatment alone is challenging for a dog in prime condition, which Scout, unfortunately, is not." Ethan stepped forward, his small face set in determined lines. "But you can help her, right? You can make her better." The doctor knelt to his level, her voice gentling. "We're going to do everything we can, Ethan. Scout is clearly a fighter. She survived things that would have defeated most dogs. But I need you to understand that she's very sick. The treatments will be expensive and difficult. And even then, she may not fully recover." "We'll do whatever it takes," Robert said firmly. "Cost isn't an issue." The veterinarian nodded, understanding the depth of the family's commitment. "In that case, I recommend we transfer her to the University Veterinary Hospital tomorrow morning. They have specialists and equipment we don't have here." "Can I see her now?" Ethan asked, his voice small but steady. "Briefly," the doctor agreed. "She's sedated and on IV fluids, so she may not be very responsive. But I think it would be good for both of you." She led them to a treatment room where Scout lay on a padded table, an IV line attached to her front leg, monitors beeping steadily beside her. The sight of the once vibrant dog, now so diminished and vulnerable, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. Robert stood rigidly beside her, his jaw clenched against his own emotion. Ethan approached the table slowly. "Scout," he whispered, reaching out to touch her graying muzzle. "It's me, Ethan. I found you." His voice broke on the last word, and he pressed his face against her neck, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Scout's eyes fluttered open at his touch. Though clouded with medication and age, they focused on the boy with unmistakable recognition. Her tail thumped weakly against the table once, twice before she lacked the strength to continue. "I'm sorry I couldn't hold on to you," Ethan whispered, the guilt he'd carried for 2 years finally spilling out. "I wasn't strong enough, but I'm stronger now." "I'll help you get better." Scout's tongue darted out to lick his hand, a small gesture that nonetheless required visible effort. Then her eyes drifted closed again, the sedation and exhaustion claiming her. The veterinarian gently placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "She needs to rest now. You can come back in the morning before we transfer her." As they reluctantly prepared to leave, Sarah noticed something clutched in her son's hand. "What's that? Honey?" Ethan opened his palm to reveal several strands of Scout's black fur. "For Ranger," he explained. "So he knows his mom is coming home." The drive back to Oak Ridge was silent, each miller lost in their own thoughts, relief at finding Scout, warring with fear for her survival. Joy at the reunion tempered by the revelation of Dr. Thompson's betrayal and the mysterious appearance of the other Newfoundlands. None of them could have predicted the scene that awaited them at home, nor how the night's already extraordinary events would pale in comparison to what was yet to come. The miller's driveway was lined with patrol cars when they returned home shortly after midnight, their blue and red lights pulsing silently against the facades of neighboring houses. Sheriff Jackson stood on their front porch in conversation with a tall woman in a dark suit who flashed a badge as they approached. "Agent Catherine Reeves, FBI," she introduced herself with a brisk handshake. "Special Unit for Animal Trafficking and Abuse. We've been tracking Dr. Thompson's operation for nearly 18 months. "FBI," Sarah repeated, glancing at Robert with bewilderment. "For stolen dogs." Agent Reeves's expression remained professionally neutral. "This goes well beyond a few missing pets, Mrs. Miller. We're dealing with an international network that specializes in acquiring and breeding specific animals for private collectors and security companies. The animals are selected for intelligence, trainability, and physical capabilities, then sold for amounts you wouldn't believe." She gestured toward their garage, where the door now stood open, revealing Ranger sitting alertly beside Sheriff Jackson's deputy. "Your dog, Ranger. It represents a particularly valuable bloodline. Newfoundlands with exceptional intelligence and rescue instincts can command prices upward of $50,000 on the specialized market." Robert's expression darkened. So, Thompson was planning to steal him all along. That's why he kept coming by the house, asking all those questions. Most likely, yes. We believe he recognized the dog's potential value immediately. Agent Reeves consulted a small notebook. According to Mrs. Henderson's statement, Dr. Thompson has been involved in several suspicious incidents with valuable breeds over the years. We suspect he's been a talent scout of sorts, identifying exceptional animals in rural communities where their disappearance might be attributed to predators or misadventure. "Like Scout," Sarah said softly. 2 years ago. Agent Reeves nodded. "Based on the timeline and Mrs. Henderson's observations, it fits the pattern. Thompson likely took your dog, discovered she was pregnant, and decided to keep the entire bloodline for the breeding program." "But she escaped," Ethan interjected, stepping forward with newfound confidence. "And she survived in the forest, and she had her puppies, and she taught them how to be free." The FBI agent's professional demeanor softened slightly as she addressed the boy. "That appears to be exactly what happened. Ethan, your scout is quite remarkable." "Did you catch him?" Robert asked. "Thompson and the others?" Sheriff Jackson shook his head. "Not yet. We found their vehicle abandoned about 2 miles down the Forest Service road. They likely had another car waiting. Agent Reeves has issued alerts to all regional law enforcement. We will find them," Agent Reeves assured them. "Dr. Thompson's operation just lost its cover. He can't return to his practice or his home, and we're securing all known properties associated with the trafficking ring." She paused, her expression becoming more measured. "However, there's something else you should know. When my team searched the abandoned vehicle, we found extensive documentation, breeding records, medical files, tracking data. It appears the operation was more sophisticated than we initially believed." From her briefcase, she produced a plastic evidence bag containing what looked like a small black notebook. "This contains records of a breeding program specifically centered around one female Newfoundland, identified only as Subject S-17, based on the descriptions and dates. We believe this is your scout." Robert took the bag, examining the notebook through the plastic. "Breeding records. Yes. According to these notes, Subject S-17 produced 3 litters over the past 2 years, totaling 11 puppies. The latest entry indicates that 8 survived to maturity. The puppies were tagged with subcutaneous microchips for tracking." "The other dogs in the forest," Sarah realized. "The ones that surrounded Thompson and his men. They were all Scout's puppies, Ranger's siblings." Agent Reeves nodded. "That's our current theory. Somehow, the entire family unit remained together in the wild. which is extraordinary in itself. What's even more remarkable is that they appear to have maintained a territory specifically around Oak Ridge, almost as if Scout was keeping them close to home. Ethan's eyes widened. She was trying to come back to us all along. Perhaps, the agent acknowledged. What we do know is that the trafficking operation established a temporary holding facility about 5 miles into the national forest, accessible only by ATV or on foot. We raided it an hour ago. And, Robert prompted when she paused. It was recently abandoned, but we found evidence of at least 6 large dogs having been kept there, cages, specialized training equipment, medical supplies, also multiple trail cameras positioned throughout the surrounding forest. She hesitated before adding, "We believe Thompson was monitoring the dogs, allowing them limited freedom while documenting their behavior in a natural setting. Some of the footage recovered shows Scout leading what can only be described as coordinated hunting and defense activities with the younger dogs." "She was teaching them to survive," Ethan said with absolute certainty. Agent Reeves smiled slightly. "It certainly appears that way. Your Scout has essentially been running her own wilderness training camp for Newfoundlands." Sheriff Jackson cleared his throat. "Speaking of which, the reason we're all still here—" He gestured toward the garage where Ranger remained sitting attentively. "That dog hasn't moved an inch since you left. Wouldn't even take water from my deputy. But about 20 minutes ago, he started acting mighty strange, barking, pacing, trying to get our attention." As if on cue, Ranger rose and trotted to the garage entrance, looking expectantly at Ethan. "He wants something," the boy said, approaching his dog. Ranger immediately turned and walked deeper into the garage, stopping at a stack of storage boxes and looking back meaningfully. Robert followed, moving the boxes aside to reveal a small door, a pet entrance they'd installed years ago for Scout, but had sealed shut after her disappearance. The closure had been removed, the door pushed partially open. "It was secured when we left," Sarah said, looking to Sheriff Jackson for confirmation. "Far as I know, yes, ma'am. My men have been watching the property, but we've been focused on human intruders, not animals coming or going." Robert crouched to examine the pet door more closely, then straightened with a puzzled expression. "There's something outside. I can see movement through the gap." Agent Reeves immediately signaled to her team members, who moved into position with practiced efficiency, weapons drawn. "Mr. Miller, please step back. We'll check it out." But before anyone could move further, Ranger barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that froze everyone in place. Then, with deliberate movements, he pushed the pet door fully open with his nose. Through the small opening came another Newfoundland, smaller than Ranger but unmistakably of the same bloodline. Unlike Scout and Ranger, this dog's coat was a mottled brown and black, but the intelligent eyes and powerful build were identical. It carried something in its mouth, a bundle of fabric that it deposited gently at Ethan's feet before retreating to sit beside Ranger. Ethan knelt to examine the bundle. "It's a baby blanket." Sarah moved closer, her breath catching as she recognized the faded blue fabric with embroidered sailboats, Ethan's own baby blanket, stored in the attic with other mementos years ago. "That's impossible," she whispered. "How could it?" Her words died as Ranger and the second dog exchanged a look. Then both turned toward the pet door again. Outside, visible now through the larger garage entrance, stood 5 more Newfoundlands, each slightly different in marking, but all bearing the unmistakable features of Scout's bloodline. And behind them, emerging from the shadows at the edge of the property, a dark-haired man in his 30s, his hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender as FBI agents trained their weapons on him. "Don't shoot," he called, his voice steady despite his precarious position. "My name is Martin Ramirez. I was Dr. Thompson's assistant until 6 months ago. I've been tracking his operation ever since I discovered what he was really doing." Agent Reeves approached cautiously, her weapon still raised. "On your knees, hands behind your head." The man complied immediately. "I can prove what I'm saying. I've been working with these dogs, helping them evade Thompson's men. They trust me." As if to confirm his words, one of the Newfoundlands, a female with a distinctive white blaze on her muzzle, moved to stand protectively beside him. "Check my left jacket pocket," Martin continued. "There's a flash drive with evidence, financial records, shipping manifests, client lists, everything the FBI needs to dismantle the entire network." Agent Reeves signaled to a colleague, who carefully retrieved the flash drive. "We'll verify your claims, Mr. Ramirez. In the meantime, you're in custody." "Fair enough," Martin agreed. "But there's something more urgent you need to know. Thompson wasn't just stealing dogs. For the past year, he's been experimenting with training methods, harsh, cruel techniques designed to enhance the animal's protective instincts. When Scout escaped with her first litter, it threw his entire program into chaos. He's been obsessed with recapturing them ever since." "Why?" Robert demanded. "What's so special about Scout and her puppies?" Martin's expression was grim. "Because they're the only ones who ever escaped successfully. Because Scout somehow managed to keep her entire family together and evade professional trackers for 2 years. And because—" He hesitated, glancing at the assembled dogs. "Because they've demonstrated abilities that Thompson believes could revolutionize the military and private security canine programs. Abilities worth millions to the right buyers." "They're just dogs," Sheriff Jackson said skeptically. "Smart ones, granted, but still just dogs." Martin shook his head. "With respect, Sheriff, they're much more than that. Scout has essentially created her own pack structure and training system in the wild. She's taught her offspring to work together in ways that domestic dogs simply don't. They coordinate their movements. They solve problems collectively. They use diversionary tactics and ambushes when threatened." "And you've been helping them?" Agent Reeves asked, her tone making it clear she found this difficult to believe. "For the past 6 months. Yes. After I discovered what Thompson was really doing, I couldn't just walk away." Martin's gaze drifted to the Newfoundlands, who had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, watching the humans with alert attention. "I started by leaving food at the edge of the forest. Eventually, they began to trust me. I've been documenting everything, trying to gather enough evidence to stop Thompson without putting the dogs at risk." Ethan, who had been listening intently, suddenly stepped forward. "Is that how you knew about Scout? That she was at the animal hospital?" Martin looked surprised. "She's alive. You found her." "She's hurt," Ethan said, his voice catching. "But the doctors are helping her." Relief washed over Martin's face. "That's incredible news. I feared the worst when she disappeared 3 days ago. The rest of the pack has been frantic, searching everywhere." "Wait," Robert interjected. "You're saying these dogs knew Scout was missing and were actively looking for her?" Exactly that. Yes, their bond is extraordinary. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his kneeling position. Listen, I know how this looks, but I'm on your side. Thompson and his associates are planning to move their entire operation tonight. They have a private airfield outside Livingston and a cargo plane scheduled for departure at dawn. If they escape with their research and breeding records, they'll just set up again somewhere else. Agent Reeves studied him for a long moment, then nodded to her colleagues. Get him up. Secure him in the vehicle. We'll sort this out at headquarters. She turned to Sheriff Jackson. I need to coordinate with the field office in Livingston immediately. As the FBI agents led Martin toward their vehicle, Ranger suddenly barked a sharp, insistent sound. He trotted to Ethan's side, nudging the boy's hand, then looking meaningfully at the other Newfoundlands. I think he wants me to go with them, Ethan said, looking up at his parents. Absolutely not, Sarah replied immediately, but Robert was watching the dogs with the forester's trained eye. Wait. Look at their behavior. The Newfoundlands had arranged themselves in what could only be described as a formation, the largest male at the front, the others creating a protective circle with a space in the center, as if waiting for something or someone. Agent Reeves had paused, observing the same unusual configuration. In 15 years with the Bureau, I've never seen anything like this, she admitted. They want to take us to something, Ethan insisted. Or someone, as if confirming his intuition. Ranger gently took the sleeve of Ethan's jacket between his teeth, tugging him toward the assembled dogs. It could be a trap, Sheriff Jackson warned. No. Martin called from the back of the FBI vehicle. They're trying to help. Scout has created a network of dens throughout the forest. If Thompson left anything behind evidence, other animals the pack would know. Robert and Sarah exchanged a long look. Years of shared parenting decisions compressed into a silent conversation. We go together, Robert finally said, with proper escort. He turned to Agent Reeves. Your team, Sheriff Jackson, my family, we follow the dogs, but at the first sign of trouble, we retreat. Agreed. The FBI agent considered for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. But the boy stays in the middle of the group at all times, and we move carefully. As they prepared to depart, flashlights distributed, communications checked, weapons secured. Ethan knelt beside Ranger, his small hand buried in the dog's thick fur. We're going to find out what happened to your mom. Aren't we? He whispered. And then we're going to bring her home. All of you. Ranger's steady gaze held a wisdom beyond human understanding, but his gentle lick of the boy's cheek needed no translation at all. 1 year later, the Miller home buzzed with activity as guests arrived for what had become an annual celebration, Scouts Rescue Day. The spacious backyard had been transformed with streamers and balloons, picnic tables laden with food, and a large banner reading, "Heroes come in all species," hanging between 2 maple trees. Ethan, now 9 years old and noticeably taller, raced around the yard with a group of friends, their laughter punctuated by the occasional bark from Ranger, who monitored their game with attentive eyes. The Newfoundland had filled out in the past year, his glossy black coat and powerful build drawing admiring comments from visitors who didn't know his remarkable story. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of lemonade, pausing to survey the gathering with quiet satisfaction. Sheriff Jackson and his wife chatted with Robert near the grill. Mrs. Henderson held court from a comfortable chair in the shade, regaling newcomers with her version of The Night the Dogs Saved Oak Ridge, a tale that grew more elaborate with each telling. A mix of neighbors, friends, and colleagues filled the remaining space, all drawn together by the extraordinary events of the previous year. And there, in a specially constructed shaded area with a cushioned platform that allowed her to greet guests without standing, lay Scout. Her once midnight coat now bore significant silver, and her right front leg remained permanently damaged despite multiple surgeries. But her eyes were bright and alert as she accepted gentle pats and the occasional treat from admiring visitors. "She's doing well today," came a voice at Sarah's elbow. Martin Ramirez, no longer in custody, but now employed as a wildlife rehabilitation specialist with the State Conservation Department, nodded toward Scout. "The new medication seems to be helping with her arthritis." "It is," Sarah agreed. "She even managed a short walk around the block yesterday." Ethan was thrilled. The past year had transformed Martin's life as dramatically as it had the Millers. After his information led to the successful raid on Thompson's private airfield, resulting in multiple arrests and the rescue of 15 additional dogs from various breeds, the FBI had dropped all potential charges against him. His extensive documentation of Thompson's operation and his work with Scout's pack had instead earned him a consulting position and eventually a permanent role with the Conservation Department. "And the others?" Sarah asked. Though she already knew the answer, she asked the same question at least once a week, unable to completely set aside her concern for the Newfoundlands that had disappeared back into the forest after that fateful night. Martin smiled with understanding. "Still thriving. The wildlife cameras catch glimpses of them regularly. They've maintained their territory about 3 miles into the national forest, centered around that main den we found. No signs of conflict with other predators or human interference." What the search party had discovered that night, following Scout's pack through the moonlit forest, had astonished even the experienced FBI agents. The network of dens Martin had mentioned proved to be an elaborate system of connected natural caves and hollowed-out areas beneath fallen trees, all modified with clear evidence of canine engineering. Entrances widened, interior spaces cleared of debris, even primitive bedding made from gathered pine needles and moss. Most remarkable had been the central den, where they found not only evidence of Scout's long residence, but also a collection of items that defied easy explanation. A child's mitten Ethan had lost years earlier, a bandana Sarah had worn gardening, one of Robert's old work gloves. Somehow, over 2 years, Scout had gathered these family scents and preserved them in her wilderness home. "We're still getting requests for interviews," Sarah confided to Martin as they moved toward the refreshment table. "That documentary team from National Geographic called again last week." "I'm not surprised," Martin replied. "The scientific community remains fascinated by Scout's pack. Dr. Weissman at Cornell has been begging for permission to conduct a formal observational study." "Robert says absolutely not," Sarah said with a small smile. "He believes they've earned their privacy and freedom." The conversation paused as a commotion near the gate drew their attention. Agent Catherine Reeves, her usual stern demeanor softened by casual clothes and the small dog tucked under her arm, was being enthusiastically greeted by Ethan. "She adopted one of the rescued puppies from Thompson's facility," Martin explained, noting Sarah's surprised expression. a Bernese Mountain Dog mix. Named him Justice. That seems fitting, Sarah laughed. The party continued as afternoon stretched toward evening. Children played carefully supervised games with Ranger, who demonstrated remarkable patience with their exuberance. Adults exchanged stories, many relating to the sensational trial of Dr. Thompson and his associates, which had revealed the full extent of their international trafficking operation. Thompson himself had received a 15-year sentence for animal cruelty, trafficking, and fraud, a verdict that had made national headlines and spurred legislation strengthening penalties for animal trafficking. As twilight approached, Robert called for everyone's attention, standing on the porch steps with a glass raised. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate what our family now calls Rescue Day. 1 year ago tonight, our lives changed in ways we could never have imagined." He paused, looking toward Scout, who had lifted her head at the sound of his voice. "We thought we were rescuing a lost dog, but the truth is much more profound. Scout rescued us from grief, from fear, from the belief that some losses are permanent." Ethan moved to sit beside Scout, his arm gently draped across her shoulders. The dog leaned against him with visible contentment. "In the process," Robert continued, "we uncovered a criminal enterprise, formed new friendships, and witnessed something that science still struggles to explain: the extraordinary intelligence and devotion of these animals." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Everyone present knew some version of the story how Scout, heavily pregnant when she escaped Thompson's initial capture, had not only survived in the wild but had created and led a family group of Newfoundlands. How she had somehow taught her offspring to work together, to avoid detection, to maintain a territory specifically around Oak Ridge. How she had sent Ranger, the strongest and most human socialized of her offspring, to reconnect with the Miller family when she herself became too ill to continue. "We've all read the newspaper headlines," Robert acknowledged. "Hero dogs take down trafficking ring and canine family reunion leads to major arrests." But those headlines miss the most important part of this story. He looked directly at Ethan, his voice softening. They miss the courage of a boy who overcame his fear to reach out to a dog that frightened him. They miss the faith that kept a window cracked open for 2 years, waiting for a miracle. Sarah slipped her hand into her husband's, blinking back tears. The past year had brought its own challenges: Scout's extensive medical treatments, the media attention, the ongoing legal proceedings against Thompson's network. But it had also brought healing. Ethan's nightmares had ceased. The guilt that had burdened both father and son had lifted, and most remarkably, their family had expanded in ways they could never have anticipated. While Ranger now lived permanently with the Millers, Scout's other offspring had chosen to remain in their forest territory, wild but not completely separated. Every few weeks, usually around dawn on Sunday mornings, the family would wake to find one or more of the Newfoundlands briefly visiting their backyard, accepting food and gentle attention before disappearing back into the forest. These visits had become cherished rituals, bridges between the human and natural worlds. "So, tonight," Robert concluded, raising his glass higher, "we celebrate not just Scout's rescue, but all the rescues that happened because of her. Here's to finding what was lost, healing what was broken, and the remarkable bonds between species that remind us what it truly means to be family." "To Scout," the gathering echoed, glasses raised toward the aging Newfoundland, who acknowledged the tribute with a dignified thump of her tail. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Ethan remained beside Scout, whispering in her ear as he often did. Sarah, clearing plates nearby, caught fragments, and the rangers said they're putting up a special sign, warning people not to disturb the Newfoundland territory, calling it a unique wildlife preservation area. Scout listened with the attentive focus she had always shown her boy, her amber eyes holding wisdom accumulated through experiences few domestic dogs would ever know. Whatever remarkable intelligence had allowed her to survive, to protect her offspring, to find her way home, it shone undimmed despite her age and injuries. Later that night, with the house quiet and the party debris cleared away, the Millers gathered in the living room for their own private tradition. Robert built a small fire despite the mild evening, its warmth drawing Scout to her favorite spot on the hearth rug. Ranger settled beside her, his larger frame protectively curled around his mother's. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor between them, while Sarah and Robert occupied the couch, all of them content in the comfortable silence of family. Outside, at the edge of the property where shadow met moonlight, 5 pairs of eyes briefly gleamed before melting back into the darkness, Scout's wild offspring making their own pilgrimage to witness the peace their mother had finally found. The forest would call them back before dawn, but for this moment, the circle was complete. "Look," Ethan whispered, pointing toward the window where the silhouettes had momentarily appeared. "They came to the party after all." As we grow older, our hearts recognize a truth that youth often misses the most powerful connections in life. Transcend words, transcend species, and even transcend time itself. Scout's journey speaks to everyone who has ever lost something precious, only to discover that love leaves trails we can follow home if we're brave enough to look. This story resonates especially with those of us who've weathered life's storms. We understand the quiet heroism of a dog who never forgot her family, who passed that remembrance to her children, who found her way back despite impossible odds. It reminds us that the bonds we forge throughout our lives remain our true legacy. Whether you're remembering a childhood pet whose loyalty never wavered, a parent whose wisdom still guides you, or a home that lives now only in memory, Scout's story affirms that what matters most is never truly lost. It lives in the connections we nurture, the love we share across generations, and the hope we keep alive through our darkest hours. Like Ethan keeping his window cracked open for 2 years, sometimes faith in what seems impossible is our greatest act of courage.